Thank you, everyone, for joining us today. I'm conscious that I'm the person between you and the start of a well-deserved weekend. Hopefully, as part of this webinar, we will delve into the fascinating topic of risks on this Friday afternoon, and we'll take you on a journey, in some sense, on how organizations can effectively manage risks, cultivate resilience, and demonstrate compliance. In terms of the agenda, Hina, can you go to the agenda slide, please?
Yes. Just a second.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you. In terms of the agenda, we will start off with a round of introduction, giving you a glimpse into our backgrounds and area of expertise. We will then kick off with an overview of access management and explore the key pillars that organizations must consider to demonstrate effective compliance. We will then laser focus on the concepts of segregation of duties, and we will discuss high-level strategies for addressing them. The idea here being that we grasp the concepts, we understand the first principles, we are on the same page before we start addressing them practically. And then finally, the meat of the matter is, of course, the case study, where Hina, my colleague, will talk about how we have recently helped an organization to identify and navigate their segregation of duties risks and improve their access risk posture. Okay. So in terms of introductions, I'm Naveen Alve. I'm a director with Arya Technologies. Arya Technologies has a suite of solutions for managing your compliance needs, including segregation of duties and sensitive access risk analysis, automated controls for business process monitoring, as well as solutions for vulnerability assessments of your SAP applications. We have a track record of more than 13 years of successfully helping customers automate and manage compliance through our products. In terms of my background, it's primarily into working closely with business, IT, and internal controls team for definition of segregation of duty risk frameworks, facilitating an approach and implementation of a prioritized roadmap for remediation and mitigation. I've also been part of numerous deployment of technology solutions for managing governance, risk, and compliance. On the call today with me is my colleague, Hina Lotia. Hina is a chartered accountant, and she leads our SAP configuration review practice. She has considerable background in internal controls and managing internal audit teams, and it's that experience that she draws upon to improve our risk and control suite of products. Right, now that we've done the introductions, let's get into the access management overview. So rather than driving straight into talking about risks and controls, what we wanted to do was take a step back and give you our view of the key areas and pointers that organizations must consider when it comes to the access management space. Okay, and that starts off with user access and role design. Now, it goes without saying, but a good role design is the cornerstone of a good access management strategy. Roles define the permissions and rights granted to individuals based on their job responsibilities. By designing roles effectively, organizations can ensure that users have the appropriate privileges needed to perform their tasks, while at the same time minimizing the risk of granting excessive or unnecessary access. A good role design will also have some other good outcomes in terms of it will simplify the administration process. It will help to improve the end user experience. And finally, it will aid the overall compliance efforts in terms of the time, effort, the money that's been spent to manage this area. The next key area within access management is segregation of duties. And by that, we refer to having a fit for purpose segregation of duties and sensitive access risk framework, a framework that reflects all the business areas and the underlying applications that are relevant from a financial reporting perspective. a framework that is right-sized across critical, high, medium, and low risk ratings. Um, and another key consideration in this area is then also not just in terms of having the right framework, having the coverage for the right business areas, having the right applications for risk analysis, but another consideration in this area is also about having a strategy that can help to address the identified risks. And that's something that we are looking to touch upon in the subsequent slides today. The next key aspect when it comes to access management is operating model and process design. Now, this involves having a clear set of roles and responsibilities wherein individuals within the access management space, such as role owners, risk owners, mitigation owners have been identified, have been informed, the responsibilities have been clearly articulated, and they have been trained to perform those responsibilities. It also involves having clearly mapped processes for requesting access. So end users, when they come through in an organization and need access to an SAP application, they know the process in terms of how can they go about requesting that access. There's a role matrix in place that helps them to identify the right set of roles that are required for their job responsibilities. Having appropriate levels of approvals by the likes of line managers who will validate the identity of the user, role owners who will validate the roles that have been requested and are in line with the job responsibilities. Having the compliance teams, for example, where they can review or remediate the SOD risks before access is provisioned. Some of the other processes to also consider within the space can be periodic user access reviews. There's a clearly defined and a time-bound process within which access review needs to be performed. And this is an area where we've seen customers struggle, where the process is defined for a month, but it will typically prolong for 3 to 6 months. So these are some of the processes within the access management space. The last but not the least is then the technology platform, which acts like an enabler for all the areas that we've discussed just now. So, that technology platform ensures that there is coverage for enterprise applications that are financially significant, wherever those applications may be. In today's hybrid world, they could be there could be applications which are on-premise or applications which are based in the cloud. That technology platform will always also provide you with curated risk and control frameworks that can help you to analyze SOTSA risks across those applications. It will also provide you with out-of-the-box workflows to streamline your access processes, as well as it will provide you dashboards, insights with relevant KPIs for you to stay on top of your compliance needs. Right? Hopefully that gives you a good perspective of the different areas to consider within access management. Let's now laser focus on segregation of duties and sensitive access. Right. When it comes to segregation of duties, what we want to talk about here is first just setting the principles. And when it comes to segregation of duties, the principle is that no single individual should have control over two or more conflicting job activities whereby they are able to influence the outcome of that process. In an example that we've just chalked out here, which talks about the procurement process. So what we've tried to showcase here is a procurement process which flows across different activities in terms of creating purchase orders, approving purchase orders, and finally generating an invoice and making a payment. Now, if you are to give all of these activities to a single individual, that will expose you to a whole set of risks in terms of that individual being able to create fictitious purchase orders, being able to create fictitious invoices. They can authorize purchase of unauthorized goods, as well as they can process fraudulent payments, which is literally money going out of the door. So what does a good segregation looks like? A good segregation in this case would look like where those activities are segregated across multiple departments. So the front end of the process, in terms of the purchase order part, in terms of creation of purchase orders, in terms of approving of purchase orders, is being done by the is being done by the procurement teams, whereas the downstream part, in terms of generating invoices or processing payments, is done by the AP or the finance team. Even within those departments, there can be further segregation in terms of a maker-checker concept, where the purchase order creation is done by the agent, whereas there's a dedicated purchasing approver for approving those purchase orders, right? Hopefully, this gives a good oversight or insight into what does segregation of duties as a concept and an example looks like. If we go back to look at the second aspect of the SODSA framework, which is the sensitive access risks. So where segregation of duties talks more in terms of activity A versus activity B, it talks about two or more activities being assigned to an individual. Sensitive access risks, or sensitive access in itself, are more singular risks, where singular access assigned to a person gives them privileged or administrative access. And what we have typically seen is customers ask what can be classed as sensitive access. So we've tried to bucket them across 4 different areas. So if the question comes in terms of what can be constituted as sensitive access, our view on this is these are 4 buckets across which we can class them in terms of access that is provided to the users. The first one is the ability to manage master data. So any activity that allows you to create master data in the system can be classed as sensitive access. So that is creation of vendors, customers, materials, for example. All of those are classed as sensitive access. The second bucket that we have is access to confidential data. So these are activities where individuals have access to pricing plans, they have access to product designs, or they may even have access to customer list, for example. The third bucket that we have is financial misappropriation. So these are business level transactions or activities which can have an impact on your financial reporting. So activities around period closing, for example, or access to open previously closed periods and posting in them can be classed as sensitive access as well. The fourth bucket that we have is then everything across IT administration. So where some of the, the initial activities in terms of master data, confidential data, financial misappropriation are more business level activities. Everything outside of that in terms of system administration, the ability to create users in the system, the ability to create roles in the system, user to role assignments, IT configuration are activities that would get classed as sensitive access under the IT administration bucket. Okay, so hopefully again, that gives us a view of what is segregation of duties, what is sensitive access. Some final thoughts on this in terms of key considerations would be the fact that um, every risk that we have in an SODSA framework needs to have an owner. And this goes back to the principles that we've just discussed in terms of access management, which talks about operating model, which talks about having risk owners in place, talks about having mitigation owners in place. So when we have risk workshops with business teams in terms of identifying and aligning on segregation of duties and sensitive access risk, we always ensure that there's always a risk owner that's been assigned for that risk as well. And then the second key consideration here is then having appropriate ratings for each of those risks. So when we talk about risk remediation and mitigation approach that we will go to, can you go to the risk remediation mitigation approach, please? Right, thank you. So as I said, not all risks are equal. So we always ensure that we should ensure that for every risk, there is an appropriate rating that is assigned. And this is our view in terms of what a typical risk rating, risk ratings should be, and what should be the strategy or the response across each of them. So if I take critical risk as an example, these are the type of risks which will have a significant or a material impact on your financial reporting. And the clear response to that is to remediate those risks, i.e., uh, when users are requesting access, um, which will which will be flagged as a critical risk, you should always remediate, i.e., take away that access and ensure that users do not have that access in the system itself. The second set of risk ratings that we have are high risks, where again, these can have significant impact on your financial reporting. But again, the response is to remediate them. However, we are also conscious of the fact that, from a business perspective, there can be considerations in terms of the level of segregation that you can have within your teams, in terms of team sizes, in terms of different regions where organizations might operate. It is not always prudent to segregate that access. So these can be assigned to individuals, but purely on an exception basis. So the first response, again, to any of the high risks as part of a remediation mitigation approach would be to remediate those. Look at strategies in terms of how can we not have that access assigned to that user, and only when it's more of an exception scenario is when you assign that access. Now, when you assign the access, what we always suggest is not to have it as an open risk, is to ensure that there are appropriate mitigating controls that are assigned when such access is given to the end users. The third type of risk that we have are medium risks. So these are risks which can have an impact on financial reporting, but more are prudent, or in terms of the operational risks that can impede the integrity of the business application. The response to these risks is to mitigate. So there's the value proposition is to say that yes, access can be given for such type of risk to individual, but again, it is always to say that these should be mitigated in the sense that there needs to be appropriate mitigating controls, such as a 4i review that can happen as a control when this access is provided to the users. And then the last set of risks that we have is low risks. There's no value proposition here in terms of trying to remediate or mitigate these risks. We always suggest to just report them and not spend any time in terms of trying to remediate or mitigate those. All right. Hopefully, in terms of the access management areas that we've covered, in terms of the concept that we've tried to explain around segregation of duties and sensitive access, and a high-level strategy for addressing some of the risks, this gives you a good overview in terms of the baseline and the concept. At this stage, I'm going to hand over to Hina to walk us through the case study.
Thank you, Naveen. Yes. Hello, everyone. So in the second part of the presentation, we are going to focus on the key aspects to discuss or to focus for identification, remediation, and prevention of SOD/SA risks, and how we have been leveraging automation to effectively handle access management for our clients. So now to start with identification of SOD/SA risks. In order to ensure that we correctly identify the SOD/SA risks, the prerequisite is to have a well-defined rule set. A rule set which is designed as per leading industry practices, but at the same time, which is customized as per organization's requirements. So let's say your organization is from finance sector. In that case, you may choose not to monitor the risks pertaining to materials or productions, unlike a manufacturing concern. Also, typically we have observed that there are organizations who develop custom transactions into their ERP system in order to facilitate their business operations. Okay, so in such scenario, it is important that all such critical transactions are included in the rule set to have a comprehensive view of the SOD risks. So just to give you an example, suppose there is an organization which has developed a custom transaction ZME21N for bulk upload of purchase orders. So it should be ensured that all such critical transactions and customized transactions are included in the SOD rule set. So usually what we do is using our automated tool, we ensure that every time a risk analysis is run, this ME21N T code is treated exactly like a standard T code relating to creation of purchase orders, so that correct SOD risks are flagged upon. Also, whenever we are talking about definition of the rule set, it should be ensured that the rule set is correctly defined till authorizations object level in order to ensure that we do not get any false positives. So again, to explain this with an example. So suppose there are some users which are flagged for the risks that they can create purchase requisitions, and at the same time, they can also approve purchase requisitions. Now, the users of this organizations, we have a view that this is a conflicting access. But let's say this organization has release strategy in place and they have multiple level of approvers configured in the system, such that let's say for a group PR, the release of purchase requisition goes through multiple level of approvers and finance head is the highest level of approver. So now technically speaking, there is a SOD risk only if a user has access to create a purchase requisition and at the same time release a purchase requisition for group PR, but as the highest approver authority, that is finance head. Now, while designing the rule set in this particular case, we ensured that the release group PR, as you can see on the screen, that release group PR and as well as release code, that is finance head, is well defined at the authorizations object level for this T code ME54. So now this definition at authorizations object level, now this ensured that every time we run a risk analysis for this client, only genuine SOD risks are getting reflected. Also, using one such detailed and well-defined rule set, we have run a risk analysis and we have replicated a practical scenario. So we can touch upon the key aspects of access management. And we have run this risk analysis into our access management tool, that is QuickAudit. Now, whenever we run a risk analysis, the first thing to do is always to get a bird's eye view of the organization's risk status. So here, as you can see, the risk analysis was run for 561 users, of which 420 users are flagged for risks. So here we can see that approximately 70% of the users are flagged for the risks. The next important thing is to understand that these users are leading to how many risks within the organization. So here 420 users are causing approximately 3,600 risks. And if I need to see the conflict view of this, so here the 420 users are causing 174,000 risks. Also, once we have the number of the conflicts, it is equally important to know what is the risk categorization. So as earlier in the presentation, Naveen has talked about high risks, medium risks. So here we need to have a view that what is the risk categorization. In this particular case, if you can see, 90,000 of the total conflicts are actually pertaining to high risk category. So we can say that more than 50% of the risks are high risks. And 80,000 of the conflicts are pertaining to the medium category. So cumulatively speaking, high and medium risks are contributing to almost like 99% of the total risks. Now, the next important thing to know is about the source of the conflicts. That is from where these conflicts are getting generated. Are they coming out of same role or single role, or are they getting generated because a user is having access to multiple roles? Now, in this scenario, as you can see, around 110,000 conflicts of 174 conflicts. So if you are talking this in percentage terms, almost or more than 60% of the conflicts are actually coming out of same role. Now, this indicates that probably there is some issue in role designing or there is some inefficiency in role designing, because ideally SOD conflicts should not come out of one role. there are only 37% of the conflicts which are coming because a user is having access to multiple roles. So now, once we have this summarized view of organization's risk status, the next important step is to start chalking out the remediation plan. And while doing so, it is very valuable to refer to the usage data as it can provide key insights. Now, in this particular case, when we refer to the usage data, we observed that 55, like in 55% of the cases, the conflicting transactions were not used by the users. And in 29% of the cases, only one of the conflicting transaction was actually used by the users. So this indicates that probably users are having excessive access. They are not requiring this access probably, and they are not using it. And only 15% of the total conflicts are actually where the users are not only having conflicting access, but they are also using the conflicting access. While being in the remediation phase, it is also important to refer to some other key statistics. Like in this case, we observed that there were this typical 3 users as highlighted on the screen, which were leading to more than 50% of the total conflicts. And there were these 3 roles which were generating from where within role conflicts were getting generated, and they were leading to more than 60% of the total risks. So while chalking out our remediation plan, we initially focused on unused transactions and this top users and roles, and this helped us to fetch some quick wins for the organization. Also, when we are designing our remediation plan, at times it becomes necessary to define it to a detailed level. That is, we need to have a remediation plan user-wise and even at times role-wise. And for this, it is necessary that we drill down into the root cause of the conflicts. So just to explain this with an example, in this case, let's take this demo user 0582. Now he's flagged for a risk that he can change a vendor, and at the same time, he can also create a purchase order. So here there is a risk that probably this user can go and make some unauthorized changes in the vendor. And at the same time, using such unauthorized data, he can also create purchase orders, which and the terms might not be favorable to the organization. Now, when we are designing the remediation plan for this user, the key insight is that the transaction which is marked in red is the one which the user is actually using. Whereas the other transaction pertaining to changing the vendor, that is what the user has not used. Now, when I further drill down upon this conflict, I understand that the roles from which the user is getting this accesses. So I can see that user is getting access to transaction ME21N from role 4338. Similarly, he is getting access to XK02 from role 4339. Now, when I'm designing the exact remediation plan, I need to actually compare these accesses with the user's job profile. So we need to understand that depending upon user's job profile, is it actually that the user requires this role? And if no, then we can actually directly remove this role from the users. At times solutions are not that easy. And maybe the solution is actually to revisit the design of the roles and redesign the existing roles. Also, as Naveen has mentioned earlier, that it is not always possible to segregate the conflicting access. So at times, because of business requirements, let's say like resource bottlenecks, it is not always possible that I remove the conflicting access. But in such scenarios, it is recommended to at least have controls over SOD risks, which we call as mitigating controls. Now, in this particular case, again, there were certain users which were flagged for the risks that they can make unauthorized or changes to the vendor master, and at the same time, they can punch in non-PO based invoices. Now, again, this is a risk. And in order to ensure that we have a control over this risk, as it was not possible to segregate this conflicting access in this particular scenario, we identified and defined a mitigating control. So the organization had a control that all the changes which were made to the vendor masters or all the newly created vendors in a particular month were actually reviewed. Now, when we designed and identified this mitigating control, this control was defined at the risk level. However, it is not always necessary that we define mitigating control at risk level. We can also have controls defined to address a particular T-code combinations. So suppose the organizations have certain risks flagged such that where users can make changes to the document. But organization has control in place via configuration settings that there are only limited fields like, let's say, text, which users can edit. In that case, such a detailed configuration setting can be used as a mitigating control to mitigate all the risks pertaining to document editing. Now, coming back to this mitigating control, whenever we are defining a mitigating control, it is very important to define a control owner, because this sets an accountability that mitigating control is not only designed, but it is also getting performed effectively. Also, to make this process more effective, using our tool, we ensured that every time performance of a mitigating control became due, depending upon the frequency defined in the control owners, they got notification and reminders that control performance is due. Now, to demonstrate this, here we have defined demo user, say 0337 as control owner. Now, when I go to his login, so demo user 337, here I can see that this mitigating control is assigned to the user. Okay, and he has to perform he's yet to perform the control for the period of July. So currently it is overdue. Also, we ensured that when the control owner is performing the control, he has the functionality that he can attach the evidences of control performance, and at the same time, he can also punch in his observations via comments. In this particular case, organization also had requirement that every time a control is performed, it is further sent to XYZ people in the organization for approvals. And accordingly, we configured the approval hierarchy in the tool so that whenever a user completes his performance, it does require a approval. Also, this user control performers, they also have functionality to see that when their next performances are becoming due. So they can actually plan well in advance. Now, since we have talked about identification, remediation, and also mitigation, the next important step is prevention. That is, organizations should have a proactive mechanism in place to deal with SOD risks. And in this case, to ensure that, we used our SOD risk simulator and workflow management tool to ensure that every time a user asks for a new access in the system or there is a request to create a new user, such new access is not granted unless it is approved by all the requisite level of approvers. So now, to demonstrate this, in this case, so in this case, there was a user, demo user, let's say 001. Now he has requested access to T-code ME21N. Now this access will not be granted unless it is approved by all these 5 level of approvers as configured in the system. Also, usually whenever there is a requirement to grant the access, it typically first goes to the technical approver. And the tool enabled the technical approver to see that if this access is granted, it will lead to which risks. So user will be flagged for which risks if a particular access is granted. So to continue with this example, here, if I am the technical approver, I can see that if this access is granted to T code ME21N, it will lead to two conflicts, that is two risks, risk PTP004 and PTP007, and cumulatively it will lead to 27 conflicts. Also, whenever a access is granted, typically to a T code, let's say, it is granted via a role. So it becomes necessary for the technical user to know that this particular access can be granted through which roles. So in this case, the access to ME21N can be granted through the roles enlisted here. Also here, the tool flags that if the access is granted, say through role 11225, it will generate how many conflicts? So it will generate 65 conflicts. This list is presented in the ascending order. So logically, the role which is presented at the top becomes a best fit role. Now, the technical approver can select this best fit role, and once he approves this and this access is also approved by all other approvers, the access can be granted to the user in the ERP system itself. Now, since we have also talked about prevention of the risks, next important point to discuss is that there should be continuous compliance. So organizations on periodic basis, they should review the existing access of the users to ensure continuous compliance. Now, to ensure this, in this particular case, we set up and scheduled periodic user access review. Now, this ensured that the managers of this organization, they were able to review the access of the users assigned to them. So let's see this. So here, if I am a manager, I can download the report, and the report looks something like this. It gives list of all the users who are assigned to me, and along with extra details like what are the T codes or what are the accesses this user has, whether that access is leading to any conflict, and is that particular access used by the user. So here, if I am the manager, I can filter upon the accesses which are actually causing the conflicts. I can also see whether that access, conflicting access, is used by the user. And I can punch in the observations that what are the action items required for this particular access. Do I want to retain this access, or would I wish this access to be removed? Now, this ensured that the basis team of the organization, it received a comprehensive report of all the action items from the managers for the existing users. And once the basis team reviewed it, approved it, all the required changes could be directly made in the ERP system. So up till now, we have primarily discussed about identification, remediation, prevention, and sustenance pertaining to the segregation of duties part of the access management. As Naveen has mentioned earlier, another important key leg of access management is critical access. So it's important to monitor access to the critical transactions within an organization. Now, in this case, we identified all the critical transactions, and we included those critical transactions in the rule set itself. Now, this ensured that every time a risk analysis was run, organization got a detailed report of list of the users who have access to the critical transactions. So here, this is the list of all the users along with additional details. So here, if I click here, I can see that which critical transactions this or a particular user has access to. And at the same time, the transactions which are highlighted in the red, they depict that that particular transaction has been used by the user. Now, it is also important to note that at times, it is necessary to monitor critical access not at the transaction level, but at authorization objects level also. So in this case, we identified all the critical authorization objects, like authorization objects pertaining to import of transport requests, or let's say authorization objects pertaining to changes to the backend tables. And we designed a report which ensured that accesses to this critical authorization objects was also getting monitored on continuous basis. At times, if it is not possible to have such a continuous monitoring system implemented for an organization, it is still recommended to get the accesses of the users reviewed for SOD SA risks on periodic basis to ensure that the organization has some mechanism to deal with SOD SA risks. Now, since we have discussed all the important elements pertaining to SOD access management, SOD risks, also critical accesses, we have discussed them in theory, and also we have discussed a practical example. I hope that this presentation helped you to get insights into intricacies of access management and their importance, especially in today's digitally dependent world. As we are towards the conclusion of the presentation, if you have any questions pertaining to access management or the tool, please punch in the Q&A section, and we can take next 15 minutes to discuss the questions in detail. Thank you.
Thank you, Hina. I can already see some questions being asked. I think the first question is, how can these tools be deployed? Do they need to be installed on the server, or is there a cloud version of it? Okay, so I think this question is related to the deployment model of QuickAudit, and being able to perform a segregation of duties and sensitive access risk analysis. So in terms of deployment models, we have an extremely flexible deployment models in terms of if you want the tool to be installed within your IT landscape, there is an on-premise installation that's available. If you want it to be more of a cloud-based version, there's a cloud-based version that is enabled as well. And finally, if you don't want to install the tool, you don't want a subscription, but want more of an ad hoc service in terms of running a risk analysis and getting the outputs, that is something that's also available through QuickAudit. Okay. The next question is, are the products compatible with S/4HANA? Hina, do you want to take that?
Yeah, sure. So yes, all the tools are compatible with S/4HANA, including the latest release of October 22.
Cool. Okay, and the next question is, how long does it take to implement the tools and get it functional? So in terms of in terms of the deployment timelines, we typically give a time frame of 2 weeks, and that is purely because we are catering for we are catering for setup of infrastructure, but otherwise QuickAudit just by itself we are able to deploy it within a week. Okay. I think those were the questions we had. I think if there are any other questions, we'll give it a minute or two for people to include them in the Q&A box.
Sure.
No worries. If there is no more questions, we'll give it another minute now to see if there's any more that come in. Right. Well, if that's all the questions there, then we'll end the webinar here. And thank you both for speaking on this webinar, and thank you everyone for dialing in. and we hope to see you soon.
Yes, thank you for your attention and questions. Yes, thank you, everyone.
Thank
Have a
you.
good weekend.
Bye.
Bye.
Yes.